Hello, and welcome to episode 10 of the Your Body Has Your Back podcast. Today, we are diving in and answering more of your questions with round 2 of our Q&A episode. So a couple weeks ago, we asked you what your burning gut health and hormone questions were, and we answered them in episode 8 of the podcast. And we got so many amazing questions that we decided to do a part 2. And we are so excited to continue supporting you guys and really answering the questions that come up as you work your way through the podcast. We have been just floored with the feedback, with the kind reviews, and with all of the really just incredible questions that have come in, from all of you really wanting to support and optimize your gut health and hormones. So without further ado, we are going to dive in, answer your questions, and Abby is going to kick things off with question number 1.
All right. So this is definitely a question that Jillian and I talk about a lot, and we see it referenced a lot. So are seed oils such as sunflower and canola oil to be avoided? So this is a topic that we often see like hotly debated in the social media world. And unfortunately, that same social media world makes what should be a pretty straightforward topic seem much more confusing than it should be. So seed oils, such as sunflower and canola oil, they're high in omega-6 fatty acids. Omega-6 fatty acids are needed in our body to create inflammatory compounds that can help our bodies utilize short-term inflammation to heal. So such as we get a cut on our hand, that cut becomes inflamed, it's hot, it's red, it's swollen in the process of healing. The challenge is that these omega-6 fatty acids need to be balanced in our bodies in relation to how much anti-inflammatory omega-3 fatty acids we have, so that once that healing response is concluded, that inflammatory action can also conclude. So the balance is important. Now, the challenge in today's 21st century modern world is we massively, and that's in capitals, have increased our consumption of omega-6 fatty acids. Those are more known as the inflammatory fatty acids, even though some have anti-inflammatory properties, but we're just going to talk about them as inflammatory for the purpose of this question. And we've massively reduced our intake of omega-3 fatty acids, which are more of the anti-inflammatory. So we're talking about like 100 years ago, to put this in reference, the omega-6 to 3 ratio was around a 4-to-1 or less. While today, that ratio is more of a 20-to-1 in favor of those omega-6s. So that's a really big difference. So just giving you some context here that the balance is key, and we've massively shifted the balance. So that higher intake of those omega-6 fatty acids is mainly from industrial seed oils that are higher in those omega-6s. So we're talking about the sunflower and the canola oils and the seed oils. So this imbalance between those elevated omega-6 intake and the lower omega-3 intake creates a pro-inflammatory, pro-allergic state that contributes to imbalances in our immune responses, which is a pretty big deal. So our goal should be to reduce that omega-6 to 3 ratio by, our favorite way to really talk about it is removing omega-6 oils from your home. So we like to specifically talk about it in reference to the home because we don't need to police every single piece of food that we're taking in and its exposure to omega-6, as long as we're really working towards establishing a balance of less omega-6 and more omega-3 inside of our home. And then we're also emphasizing eating and cooking more inside of our home. So then this frees up some of that mental space that we're getting all tied up in knots about this question to simply enjoy foods when we're out eating. So because we've really done the homework of being mindful of that balance of omega-6 and omega-3s so we can really have joy in the foods that we eat out. So what would this look like? Maybe in our homes, we're cooking with ghee or avocado oil when we're doing high heat cooking. We're using olive oil for low heat cooking. So we're reducing the excess intake of omega-6s in the home because we're not using those seed oils when we're cooking in the home. And then we're also emphasizing some of those omega-3 fatty acids, such as wild salmon and sardines and anchovies, pasture-raised eggs, flax seeds, chia seeds, walnuts. This is also where a fish oil supplement can be really helpful. So we're working on more effective omega-6 to 3 balance, and that can help to reduce inflammation, can reduce kind of allergic-like events, can even help to better balance for like autoimmune-like reactions by creating a better balance of the inflammatory cascades in our body. So Jillian, I know we've talked about this so much. Do you have any insights and things to kind of add to that? This is definitely one that we get excited about when we talk about.
We definitely get excited. And there is just so much misinformation out there. There's a lot of fear mongering out there. And the way that, Abby and I like to approach these conversations is that, we want you to have this information. You deserve to have this information because we know there is such an imbalance with, the consumption of the omega-6s to the omega-3s. And this is a big deal. But we don't need to fearmonger and make people feel bad. We just want you to have the information, and we want to empower you to make really supportive adjustments that move the needle with your health. And I love the focus on optimizing the omega-6 to omega-3 intake by increasing consumption of omega-3s like Abby described. I run a lot of essential fatty acid blood tests with clients, and, imbalances are very, very common in general, but I see a lot of low omega-3s. Mm-hmm. So I think that's an opportunity for most people to focus on that is really kind of based in addition nutrition, like Abby and I've, discussed in previous episodes in terms of what can we add into the diet to support and optimize health. So I love the focus on bringing in more omega-3 fatty acids, being, mindful of keeping, the omega-6 oils out of the home. And that's just an easy swap, honestly, at the end of the day. If it's something you weren't aware of, just make a swap. And I also want to point out that the majority of omega-6 fatty acids in the U.S. adult comes from packaged processed foods. Mm-hmm. So these industrial seed oils that Abby's talking about, they are very cheap and inexpensive for food companies. So when we're buying crackers and cookies and packaged all sorts of
oat milk,
whatever food product, oat milk. Oh my gosh. Oat milk. Yes. Oat milk. Just so many packaged processed foods, bottled salad dressings, things like that. Yes, there are better options out there now. But the majority of these food products do contain these industrial seed oils that are cheap for food companies. So that's where the majority of these things are coming in. So I think even taking it a step further, to recommend, not saying, okay, I'm never going to eat a piece of packaged or processed food, but to, get comfortable reading a food label and, determining if a product, does contain some of these omega-6 dominant, rich oils. And, if a product you love does have it, does it mean you're never, ever, ever going to eat it again? Maybe not. That choice is up to you, but there might be an alternative that contains a better quality oil, or maybe there's an opportunity to just bring in more whole foods, more unpackaged processed foods that don't have ingredient labels and, don't have oils added at all. So just something else that I was kind of thinking about as you were going through those recommendations, but I think you nailed it in terms of, the approach that we like to kind of take when talking about this very controversial topic.
Yeah, it's such a good point that you make too, of like, we're seeing canola oil in crackers. We're seeing canola oil in oat milk. We're seeing canola oil in foods that, why do we need oil in those foods? There are, plenty of brands that exist. Like if we think about crackers, Mary's Gone Crackers has no oil in it. And they're, it's kind of like, so it's simply a matter of maybe just changing up some of the brands. You go to the grocery store and you decide like, okay, today is going to be the day that I'm going to look at all the ingredients in my crackers and I'm going to choose the one. And, you certainly could spend an entire grocery haul like looking at all of the ingredients, or just have a mission to say, today I'm going to master the salad dressing. Today I'm going to master the crackers. Today I'm going to master the, oat milks, or throw oat milk out and choose an organic brand. And so take it like kind of one step at a time. We don't have to pull the rug out from under ourselves.
I love that. And to add to that, make it fun, right? Like this can be enjoyable, and it doesn't need to feel scary. And it all doesn't have to happen overnight either. But we want to be conscious consumers. And when we choose products that are better quality, food companies are going to be held accountable and are going to need to make better products for consumers. I always like to tell clients to be aware of industrial seed oils, not beware in terms of fear, but be aware, be a conscious consumer, and know that perfection truly doesn't exist. But with these tips that we're describing, you can significantly impact your health with improving this ratio. And we know that, chronic low-grade inflammation is like at the root of all things. It's a component of virtually every, disease state and dynamic out there. So with some of these small shifts over time, you're really going to move the needle.
So true.
So our next question was how to support hormones when on a hormone-based med for something like endo or endometriosis, for those of you that aren't familiar. So first of all, birth control, I want to mention, is offered typically as the first line of intervention in our healthcare system for conditions like endo, because birth control specifically works to shut down ovulation, and it essentially induces estrogen deficiency or low estrogen, which is going to slow the growth of endo lesions. Or that's specifically how the combined oral contraceptive works when it's, being used for the treatment of endo. IUDs are also used commonly with endo, which will also disrupt, hormones. It will thin the uterine lining and prevent endo lesions from progressing. And these tools, by interfering with the body's hormones, ultimately can help with symptom progression. But ultimately, this is really a Band-Aid when we're just focusing on, disrupting a symptom or suppressing a symptom. And there is definitely a lot more to the story when it comes to endometriosis. Endometriosis is not just a hormone condition. I can't answer this question without emphasizing that enough. Despite what conventional, medical care is kind of putting out there or how they're approaching treatment for endo, it is not just a hormone condition. Endo is really more of an inflammatory condition. You're hearing that inflammation come up again. So it's an inflammatory condition, and newer research is finding that there is a lot of immune involvement and gut involvement. So there's a lot of complexities to endo, and it's not just about shutting off the hormones. But whether you are on birth control or not, as always, Abby and I are never anti-medication or anti-birth control. But if birth control is a tool that makes sense for you, it should never be the only treatment modality, because again, we're just kind of band-aiding things. So whether you are on birth control or not, there are so many things that we can do to support your endo. Some of the top things that I'd recommend kind of diving into right off the bat are things like balancing blood sugar. Go back to episode 2 for a deep dive on all things blood sugar. We know that blood sugar has a massive impact on sex hormones, inflammation, the gut, all of which are, playing a big role with endometriosis. I'd also recommend establishing or working towards an anti-inflammatory dietary pattern. So optimizing that, omega-6 to omega-3 ratio with the fats you're bringing into your diet, bringing in more fiber, more colorful, plant foods and antioxidants, to support lowering inflammation. Also, minimizing exposure to endocrine disruptors. This is a big thing for everyone. In the episode that we did on drainage and detoxification, we talked quite a bit about, chemicals and endocrine disruptors and things in our environment. So all of us, ideally are going to benefit from minimizing exposure, but particularly with a condition like endo, we know that this is a big deal in terms of other external exogenous things that are impacting our hormones and the immune system. Sleep, super foundational. I know it's not the sexiest or the most exciting thing to mention, but just really, really important when we're talking about anything immune driven, anything hormonal. So prioritize sleep, work on your circadian rhythms, make sure that we're getting that 7 to 9 hours. Also balanced exercise. So making sure we're not under exercising, over exercising, and we're working towards a nice supportive routine. Gluten is also something that I would recommend women with endometriosis get curious about. And I will preface this by saying I'm very mindful about recommendations around elimination diets. And I feel, very strongly that an elimination needs to be warranted, or, these things need to be approached with caution, because there's a lot of abuse of elimination diets, and these things can ultimately create more problems, more stress down the line. But I do think for women with endo that it's a great idea to get curious about gluten. There was a really interesting small study done in 2012 that had a group of 207 women with endo eliminate gluten, fully remove it from their diet. And that was the only intervention. After 12 months, 75% of women in that group of 207 experienced significant reductions in endo-related pain, which is super profound. And just speaking to what I see in practice, I also see this often make a difference for women with endo. It's, again, this is a small study. We don't have, a massive amount of data, but this is really intriguing. And, in terms of what we see in practice, I think it's worth exploring. I will say when it comes to eliminating any foods, my recommendation is always to kind of start with building that foundation first, and then kind of exploring the removal and giving yourself some time to work into that. There's also great supplements that have some good data for supporting endo, specifically things like curcumin, the active compound, anti-inflammatory compound in turmeric, NAC or N-acetylcysteine, berberine, zinc. So all sorts of supportive supplements that can be explored. And ultimately, at the end of the day, we are going to want to understand, your root causes and come up with kind of a customized approach for addressing those dynamics. But anyone and everyone with endo can benefit from those things that I described and working through them over time, whether you are on hormonal birth control or not.
Yeah. And I think the piece of thinking about kind of diet foundations first, that piece of saying, I'm just going to go gluten-free, and swapping out gluten-containing products for gluten-free products that then we're kind of going package to package. And, in the world of gluten-free, we can run into a lot of compound ingredients, chemical ingredients, inflammatory oils, things like that. So thinking of, first, don't pull the rug out from under yourself, and just kind of switching over to can I start to emphasize more real whole foods? And then from there, emphasizing what are, maybe carbohydrate sources that are innately gluten-free. So we start thinking about the millets, or even sweet potatoes and potatoes. We think of our starchy fibers. We think about things that, could be kind of filling what the gluten, that carbohydrate intake, and then even looking for, what are some high quality products that I could get, a really yummy bread that just happens to also be gluten-free in there, and really working from quality is that main piece, because it's not just the absence of, but it's really that idea that we were talking about, that inclusion of, and really the inclusion of nutrient density, the inclusion of quality foods. And that almost is starting there, because then all of a sudden it becomes a little bit more easeful to make that transition, pulling gluten slowly out of the diet, or kind of we know some things that we can already then utilize, as opposed to what do we eat if we don't eat gluten? I feel like that's sometimes a question that I certainly see and feel from, clients or in social media and things, people kind of feeling well, if you don't eat gluten, what do you eat? You're there are plenty of innate gluten-free foods.
I love that. What do you eat? I couldn't agree more. And I think what people don't realize is that, most whole foods, not all, but most whole foods, if you're following a kind of whole foods based dietary pattern, it's naturally going to be mostly gluten-free at the end of the day. And that's where you're, packing a major punch with actual micronutrients for nourishing your body, your cells, for lowering inflammation. So I love that. The emphasis on the whole foods and kind of optimization there. And then, seeing where you want to find a good quality, product so you can have some of those fun foods in there, because there's place for that too. But I think ultimately we just want to be thoughtful about how we're approaching all of this. So I love that.
Awesome. So our next question is, for early morning workouts, better to eat before or after? So to set the stage for this question, it's important to recognize that exercise is a stressor. So is fasting. And when we wake in the morning, we are in a fasted state. So if we pile on another tough workout on top of our fasted state, we can actually be doing a lot more harm than good for our stress, our hormones, even body composition goals, if that's, maybe part of why we're doing this fasted or thinking about this fasted morning workout. So having a small snack before that early morning movement can have a massive impact on reducing the stress in our body's experience from exercise, especially when that exercise is more high intensity or endurance based. So generally, I would say having a snack before exercise is going to be a really wise move for kind of particularly our women, but really for everyone in terms of performance and function and reducing stress on the bodies. But for quick reference, if we're doing a high intensity or an endurance workout, and that's something that we're doing like a spin class, or we're going for a long run, or we're doing a pretty intense workout, we're going to be sweating, even like heavy weightlifting, we definitely want to have something to eat before, more in the kind of carbohydrate realm. And it could be a banana or some berries or a date, like something. It doesn't have to be a huge thing, because I know some people are like, well, I feel better when I don't have anything in my system if I'm going to do, a workout like that. So just do something small. So we're kind of breaking the fast. We're giving ourselves some carbohydrates, because that's predominantly what the body is running on when we're doing in that workout state. And then kind of after, within an hour, we want to have like our full meal that's got the carbohydrates and the protein and the other kind of macronutrients and all that great stuff. Now, if you're waking up and you're doing like a low intensity workout for, let's say you're going for a walk or you're doing Pilates or yoga, and that's not going to be, you're doing it for like, 90 minutes to 2 hours. Like you probably want to let something before that. That's a very long-term, even low intensity workout to be doing or movement to be doing. But if you're doing something just kind of a 20, 30, maybe even 45-minute walk, do we necessarily need to have something before that? No, but that's where we have to be reflecting on our own body and our experience through that. So I always like to think about like, are you waking up hungry? So if you are, let's respect that and give your body some nourishment. Thinking about, definitely having some hydration, maybe some minerals before that, even the walk or the heavier exercise. And then reflecting too, how are you feeling immediately after that exercise? How are you feeling 2 hours after that exercise, 2 to 3 hours? How are you feeling that night, the next day? What's your recovery? What's your energy? If you're, in our story that we told kind of last episode, like I was doing a high intensity spin at 5:30 in the morning. I was not eating before. I would come home from grad school later that day and fall face first into my bed, incapable of like doing anything else. And that was really, it was a number of things, but that direct correlation was really from the days that I would do that high intensity spin in a fasted state. It was probably just a high intensity spin, period. But that was really, it was just too much for my body at the time. And I really had to make the choice to say, I'm going to choose to nourish my body. I'm going to choose to step into how my body wants to be supported in this time. And that was more actually pulling myself away from heavy, high intensity exercise altogether. But that could be something of, can we build in something to eat before? And really feeling, how does that change? How does your recovery change? Are you feeling, sore for days and days and days after that workout? That might be too much for you in this moment, in this time, in this kind of season of where you're at in your health. So it definitely is a conversation with your body. And that's what the most important piece is, and kind of reflecting on those pieces as you, embark in movement. And things might change. Certainly throughout the month, our cycle in terms of women is going to change in terms of the amount of stress that we have kind of resilience to. So that would definitely change in terms of the types of exercise that we want to be doing, whether it's in a fasted state or not would change. So we want to be thinking about the many different kind of areas and times that we're really asking our bodies to move, and we're being mindful of what's the type of nourishment that we're going to be supporting them with.
I couldn't agree more. And I think it is really important to highlight that, we might not often experience negative symptoms related to fasted workouts, in an immediate sense where, sometimes we're getting the endorphins from, an intense workout. If we do that cortisol stimulating movement, we're like running on stress hormones, we feel energized. And then, like Abby described with her story, maybe crashing way later in the day, we might not think about, oh, what did I do earlier, this morning? But, it's all connected at the end of the day. So it is really important to kind of assess where you are at, how your body is responding to these things, not just in the moment, but, later on in the day. How is your sleep? Are you experiencing disrupted sleep? So pay attention to what's going on with you first and foremost. But I think, the guidelines that you gave, Abby, are great in terms of, okay, if it's intense cortisol stimulating, we need fuel. And I like to describe it or think about it in the context of, utilizing carbohydrates to actually get the most out of your workout. Most individuals I know, obviously we exercise and work out for various reasons, but in terms of, what I see a lot is, women wanting to build lean muscle and, tone up and this and that. And when you have carbohydrates present in the morning, because we wake up, our glycogen stores, our carbohydrate stores are depleted. When you have carbs present for your body to utilize during a workout, you're basically telling your brain that you're well nourished, you're safe, so your body can focus on building, repairing lean muscle, and you can really get the most out of that workout. And you're going to keep cortisol, more balanced. You're going to keep blood sugar more balanced. So, I think that's a great recommendation. And I want to point out too that there are some individuals, depending on maybe what's going on in their life and their stress hormones, and to Abby's point, where they're at in their cycle, that, if you're doing even a 20, 30 minute, workout, even if it's lighter, maybe in terms of where you're at, you do need to have something. If there's a lot of adrenal, kind of dysregulation or adrenal dysfunction and cortisol issues, we may need to really prioritize something right away. So the last thing I want to mention here is that just in practice, and Abby, I'm curious what you see too. I predominantly work with women, and I really have yet to see any woman in my practice achieve any type of positive health outcomes while doing fasted workouts. It's just not something that I see. And usually we are needing to make modifications, even if it's just having that, small banana before we dive in and do the workout. But that can have a huge impact. And I just do not see good results for women that are trying to work out fasted. There is zero benefit, in my opinion.
Yeah. And I think even to expand that of the amount of women in my practice and even in just life that I have conversations with who have normalized this low blood pressure and lightheadedness and low energy or kind of the roller coaster energy, and are just kind of oh, this is what it is. It's really from stress on the body in the first place that we have the biggest impact over, is making sure that we are regularly fueling our body pre-exercise and, just in the morning in general, not going to these extended fasts, even, pushing off breakfast by a 2-hour point. It's having breakfast with an hour or two of waking and really helping to, support your body. I think, I just hear it so often that it feels oh no, that's just me. I've always had that. And, I stand up and I see the stars and hopefully I don't pass out. And it's we don't need to be struggling that way, but that's also just as concerning as high blood pressure. But for some reason
100%.
we're all being able to walk around with it in conventional medicines. Good job. Are you a marathon runner? It's no, actually. Like, I remember, I mean, that was something that I personally struggled with too. And I remember they'd be like, "Oh, are you a runner?" I'm like, "I run on occasion. I don't enjoy it, but sure." And it was like,
Yeah.
because my blood pressure was so low.
Oh my gosh.
Mm,
Yeah. And the normalization of these things, or just even the lack of talking about these things, it's wild. And there's reasons why these things are happening. And oftentimes it's pretty wild that something like just a small adjustment to how you fuel your body and how you start your day, can have such a massive, profound impact on how you feel, the symptoms you're experiencing on a day-to-day basis, and your long-term health.
yeah. So important.
So, on to our next question here. Someone asked hormones during perimenopause and tools to minimize symptoms. So, really kind of asking what's happening with hormones during perimenopause and how to support that. So, for anyone that is not familiar, just want to give you the quick and dirty on, kind of what perimenopause is, or what's happening, during this phase of life. So perimenopause is essentially it's a transition phase, or a process where the body is going through a lot of changes that will eventually lead to menopause and no longer having a menstrual cycle. It usually starts somewhere in your mid 40s. It can happen sooner for some women. It can happen much later for some women, but generally mid 40s is where we see this perimenopause phase start, and it can last anywhere from about 4 to 8 years. There is no kind of single test that you can do to determine if you are perimenopausal or you're not perimenopausal. And ultimately, this kind of transition period is identified by the evaluation of, clinical symptoms. So the things that you are noticing and observing and experiencing with your body. Some of the big symptoms that, we see that will pop up are things like, changes in menstrual cycle lengths. So often shorter menstrual cycles, mood swings, significant sleep disturbances, night sweats, headaches, things that actually weren't happening before or weren't happening with the same frequency or severity. And also, just more PMS symptoms, and a big one too that, women experience that can feel frustrating is, shifts with their weight without any changes to eating, exercise, diet, lifestyle habits. So basically, there's a lot of shifts that are going on with hormones during perimenopause. But the three kind of big shifts, or the three big things happening in the body for women during this period, are decreases in progesterone levels. So that hormone that we produce after ovulation. So there's a big decline here. And progesterone is considered to be our calming hormone. It balances out estrogen. So when we don't have enough of it, we can, start to experience symptoms. The other shift is big, kind of dramatic fluctuations with estrogen. And estrogen levels can kind of jump around a bit, cycle to cycle, and even within the same cycle, ranging from very high levels of estrogen to very low levels of estrogen, both of which will really turn up the volume on symptoms. And lastly, disruption or dysregulation with the HPO axis, which is basically how the brain is communicating with the ovaries, or the reproductive hormones. So there's some disruptions here in terms of, signaling and messengers being sent out. So those are the three things that we see driving a lot of symptoms for women during this perimenopausal period. And this is a good opportunity, or good, time to remind everyone that, sex hormones aren't just about the menstrual cycle. Sex hormones play a massive role in a lot of different, operations and, systems in the body, even though we only often think about them when it comes to the menstrual cycle. So as an example, sex hormones like estrogen and progesterone have a significant impact on insulin sensitivity. So one of the big things that we see throughout, perimenopause and into menopause are decreases with insulin sensitivity. So more blood sugar dysregulation, more kind of wonkiness with hunger and satiety cues. So just again, as an example of how estrogen and progesterone are impacting things outside of what's going on with, the menstrual cycle. When we have all of these changes with sex hormones, particularly when we're getting, these swings with lower levels of estrogen, the adrenal glands and actually adipose tissue, fat tissue can start to produce estrogen, which is pretty amazing when you think about it in terms of, they're really trying to fight for you a little bit and, become their own little, fat really becomes its own little endocrine gland. And we have the adrenals, secreting estrogen. And this can also cause, shifts with weight and body composition. So, the body wants to hold on to more adipose tissue, more visceral fat as a way to, maintain, ideally some normalcy with estrogen levels. The gallbladder is really impacted when we have these big shifts with sex hormones, which can have a ripple effect on countless things. We really got to get a gallbladder episode on the agenda, or maybe even a series, because we love talking about the gallbladder. But that can have a ripple effect on a variety of things, including the thyroid and the gut. So these sex hormone shifts are really impacting things systemically. So know that if you are in the weeds of perimenopause or experiencing these shifts, your body's going through a lot. There are big things happening during this time period. But it is not all, gloom and doom, or doom and gloom, however you say it. There are so many ways to support the body effectively during this transition. Unfortunately, and I'm sure this comes as no surprise, women during this phase of life just don't really get much information. It's all about hormones, and maybe they are offered, hormone replacement therapy, as they get deeper into things. But really, there's a ton that we can do to support the body effectively during this transition to help provide more stability and to mitigate symptoms. So what I want to mention right off the bat with perimenopause, just because I see this so often in practice, because many women are experiencing some shifts with weight and body composition, amongst other things, eating less and exercising more and driving your body into the ground is not going to help. When your hormones are shifting, your body is going through a lot. There's a lot of stress on the body. Sleep is disrupted, blood sugar is disrupted. These things are stressful. And, your body is actually, going through a transition where it is changing how it operates. So if we're just arbitrarily trying to eat very little and engage in a whole bunch of, intense workouts, it's probably going to make things worse at the end of the day. We are, throwing gasoline on the fire. So I think that's just important to call out right off the bat. But the big things that I would recommend focusing on in a general sense for supporting hormones during this period would be focus on the fundamentals, all of the things that Abby and I have covered so deeply throughout this first season of the podcast. And there is some tweaking that we can do alongside that to kind of customize based off, these hormonal shifts that we are, talking about. So first and foremost, blood sugar balance is really, really key here. And the decreased insulin resistance is just really, really problematic. Doesn't feel good. So focusing on blood sugar balance and very much emphasizing protein. So really amping up that protein intake can be tremendously helpful, throughout this period of time to provide more blood sugar stability. Maybe playing around with the types of carbohydrates you are eating and the sources. So really emphasizing some of the fiber-rich starches that Abby had mentioned earlier in this episode with, our roots and fruit and, great quality, whole grains and things like that. So play around with that to see how your body responds. Really focus on meal frequency and timing. So work to align your pattern of eating with your circadian rhythm, which we talked about in the circadian rhythm episode in a lot of depth if you're interested in learning more. But we know that meal frequency, meal timing is going to impact, the circadian rhythm, which kind of dictates the show when it comes to hormones. So working on that. Absolutely prioritizing sleep and stress reduction, which of course we can all benefit from. But if you are very symptomatic, blood sugar is shifting, hone in on sleep. Make it a priority. Protect sleep with your life, because the more, good quality sleep that we can get, the better we are going to feel, and, the better we're going to be able to manage some of these shifts with, sex hormones and blood sugar and all of that. I would recommend really increasing walking, metabolic movement, breaking up sedentary time. These things help to increase or improve insulin sensitivity, helps with, cortisol and stress hormones. And generally, walking is just very underrated. So focusing on that. And then additionally, considering ditching the, higher intensity cardio, kind of that chronic cortisol stimulating movement. Because again, the body's already going through a lot of stress. And focus on things like weightlifting, maybe even working towards some heavier weightlifting for supporting lean muscle. The more lean muscle we have, the higher our metabolic rate. The more lean muscle we have, the more sensitive we are to insulin, and the better we're able to regulate things like blood sugar. So something to consider there in terms of movement. And then lastly, well, actually the two last things, one, discuss supplements, ideally with your functional provider who understands this phase of life. So maybe there are some supplements that you can utilize to kind of help balance things out. Abby and I do this often in practice with clients. There's fundamental things that can be super, super helpful. And then the second thing being, if you work through all these fundamentals and you've made tweaks based off where you're at, maybe doing some deeper testing, could be helpful to get a better sense of what's going on with your body and how you can be supported in a more kind of personalized way.
That's a great answer.
Do you have any other, kind of thoughts or things to add on perimenopause? I feel like it's a little challenging because every individual is different in all contexts, but I think particularly with some of these big life shifts with hormones, things can be so variable and personalized based off the individual. I don't know if you have any other kind of thoughts there.
Well, I think there's a lot of like fear that women have going into this. And it's like perimenopause and menopause sounds like some people make it sound like this, like trudge into like a death sentence of sorts of this, like, you don't even know what happens when. And I think there's just a lot of lack of, education around what is happening in the body. And then from that fear comes the restriction: exercise more, eat less. I mean, I feel like there's so many women in that kind of period of life that are existing on like, do we even call it one meal a day? It's like a half a meal a day. And there, certainly there's shifts in appetite when we have dysregulation in cortisol, and we have, kind of certainly discomfort if there is weight gain. And I understand all of the adjustments that we might be making in the intention of getting ourselves, some control in that situation. But really, it's that piece of we need to kind of create that container for our body, because there is dysregulation happening in terms of that transition of the body. And so more stability is really what helps to have more success in there. And I think the emphasis on kind of lifting weights and changing the way that we move, and kind of utilizing like the muscle tone in the body is such a maybe an underutilized conversation, because then we're also talking about like osteoporosis and osteopenia reduction and longevity and like so many important things that women, I think the conversation is a lot stronger than it has been. But I do think, even starting that intention in like our 30s is really so that we can move, maybe a little bit more gracefully through that period of life. And we can also move gracefully into like well into our like later years with so much more success.
I love that. And I think ultimately what you're describing here too is learning how to work with your body during this phase versus working against it, and reminding yourself that, your body has your back, and this transition does not have to be horrible, miserable. Yes, it's a transition, and transitions are scary, but if we can really learn to work with our body to, optimize, kind of what's going on with some foundational things and, some strategic adjustments, it doesn't have to feel so bad. And on the other end of it, maybe we come out healthier and more resilient and in an even better place than we were, before we went in.
Absolutely. I mean, let that be the goal for all of us.
Heck yeah.
All right. And our next question, gut health and eczema, correlation/causation, myth or fact. So to start, atopic dermatitis or eczema is a chronic inflammatory skin disorder. So we're really talking about what's driving the inflammatory response in the body. We've got a lot of inflammation talk today. And we've got some tools that we've already kind of explored for this. So this is awesome. We kind of love when these questions like stack up in this way. But there's definitely a gut and eczema skin correlation for some people, but it isn't only the gut. So in general, we can kind of think about it as like two major root cause areas to consider. However, there are a lot of influences from multitudes of others, but we're going to dive into these two today that are some really big hitters. And the first is cortisol and HPA dysfunction. So we're talking about that stress conversation that we're talking about the brain, we're talking about the adrenals, we're talking about kind of the stress that we're creating through our behaviors as well as our mental, emotional, and all of those pieces. And the second are gut issues. So to dive in a little bit more to our cortisol issues and our HPA dysfunction, so skin cells actively respond and shift in regards to patterns in our cortisol and our circadian rhythm. So studies really suggest that a dysfunction in our HPA axis or our cortisol rhythm in response to stress contributes to immune shifts that can increase the risk for that allergic sensitization or that exacerbation, especially under stressful conditions. So essentially, this is saying that stress can drive, which drives dysfunctions in cortisol, can be a major driver of the inflammation that contributes to eczema in susceptible bodies. So for guidance on actionable strategies when we think about stress, we have a whole episode. And diving in also to that circadian rhythm piece, that's really where we get to kind of work on patterning in our cortisol rhythms and all of that things that we've talked already extensively about of balancing blood sugar. We've talked about sleep. We've talked about the fundamentals in terms of an anti-inflammatory diet, balancing the omega-6 and the omega-3 ratios. Like those are all impactful on reducing stress on the body. And that's also going to reduce that kind of impact of this cortisol dysfunction as well, which is a major driver of kind of eczema in the body. The other piece of gut issues, the gut is a major area that plays a significant role in inflammation and immune function in the body, which are significant players in driving eczema. So the first area is microbial imbalances. So ideally, we want to see a rich diversity and abundance in the microbiome, which is significant to help to strengthen the gut barrier function as well as calm the immune system. And in individuals that struggle with eczema, we often see low bacterial diversity, which can lead to a breakdown in our gut barrier or leaky gut, which we might call it more trendy way of talking about it. And even an increase in susceptibility to opportunistic gut infections or inflammatory dynamics in the gut microbiome. So now we're kind of seeing some breakdown in the balance of that microbiome. Another area is low gut immune function. So this is talking about the immune system that lives in the gut, predominantly called secretory IgA, and its first line defense role against the colonization of pathogens or foreign microbes that play a significant role in creating balance to the immune system in the gut. So when this immune system is low, it's essentially allowing for pathogens or bullies, as I like to call them, to walk right in. I like to think of it as if there's no bouncer at the club door and your gut is this chic club. And when we don't have a bouncer, any riffraff can come walking in and really make it its home. And that can stir up a tremendous amount of inflammation and dysfunction and can exacerbate eczema. So we can see the gut being definitely a major player in that. Cortisol is a major player. We have some other pieces that can be too, but those are definitely two areas to be focusing on. And some additional amplifiers to eczema that are kind of driving, these wouldn't necessarily be formally like root causes, but they can play a major role in driving that inflammation response, that inflammatory response, and this is going to worsen eczema. So things like nutrient deficiencies. So there's many nutrients that help to build the kind of new skin, and having a deficiency in one or some of these key nutrients can lead to a dysfunction in the formation of that healthy skin, that healthy barrier. And some of these key nutrients include zinc, vitamin D, vitamin A, B vitamins, vitamin E, omega-3 fatty acids. So starting to emphasize these nutrients in food-based sources is a great place to start, as often taking higher supplement doses of one or another without the knowledge of how they interact may make things more challenging. So we really want the guidance of like a knowledgeable provider. We can even run tests that are micronutrient tests to really understand what's going on in your unique body. We can run cortisol testing. We can run gut testing. So when we want to take those conversations to a more targeted supplemental place, that's really where testing is going to be really effective at creating a cohesive and customized plan based on the individual's body. So we can really start to tease out what are the major root causes happening in this unique body, as opposed to just kind of talking about blanket statements in terms of what could be going on. So the other, no shock for anyone, is of course blood sugar issues. So imbalances in blood sugar can drive a stress response, dysregulate cortisol, and increase inflammation and eczema, because eczema, is an inflammatory condition. So any lifestyle and nutrition practice that helps to calm inflammation is a great foundation for eczema. So tuning into that episode 2 on blood sugar to really get those foundations, but really understanding that this is more about kind of the inflammatory cascades in the body than it is necessarily just the skin alone. So those topical applications can be, helpful Band-Aids if we're really uncomfortable, but we want to be working from the inside out, starting with what we're eating, how we're sleeping, how we're moving, and then getting into deeper conversations about maybe testing and supplemental strategies if those foundations are not really getting us the traction that we're hoping or that we're needing.
I think you nailed it and really hit on kind of the most important pieces in terms of where people can get started right now and where they may need to dive a little bit deeper in terms of investigating root causes and just more significant dysfunction. And if you listen to our last episode on our stories, this was a big piece of things for me. So, adrenal dysfunction, cortisol kind of chemistry and dysregulation, that was a big part of what was going on with me and the skin issues I was experiencing. And, just speaking from personal experience and from, working with clients, we often don't want to, address the stress piece, the nervous system piece. And, it's tough, but it does play a really big role. And I think something else that's just, really cool to highlight here is that eczema does happen for some reasons or a multitude of reasons. And I cannot tell you how many women I speak to and work with that, come to me for, the digestive symptoms and the period-related symptoms, the PCOS, whatever it is, and don't even mention that the eczema. And then we dive into our first assessment and it comes out that they've been chronically dealing, with eczema. Maybe they've, had to rely on steroid creams and things like that for many years, or they're just, kind of struggling for many months of the year. And they had no idea that there could be fundamental things, in terms of reducing the eczema, and then also these deeper drivers kind of creating the dysfunction that is leading to the eczema. And skin is, in my experience across the board, but, particularly with eczema, it's really, really responsive to these types of shifts in terms of blood sugar, nutrient support, anti-inflammatories, and the deeper root cause work. You can eliminate eczema. It may take time depending on, sort of what's going on, but I think it's really cool to highlight that possibility for people here.
Yeah, it's such a good point. I get that all of the time in practice with clients. They forget to tell me that they have eczema. They're like, "Oh yeah, but I've always had it. I've had it since I was a kid." So therefore it's like, "Oh, well then actually we've had some sort of simmering dysfunction since you were a child." And so it's like so informative, but it's one of those things that we've normalized. So many of, oh no, I'm always that way. I've had that since it's been that way since I'm a child. And that's the same of like, oh yeah, I've always had these like flares of IBS, but they go away for months at a time. And so they only come around like a couple times a year, but it's always been that way. Like this piece of, but it's like, so that's when your body chronically trying to be like, hey, please, I'm going to like,
listen up.
Totally. But it's like, oh, it's not bothersome enough to me at this moment to do something about. But it is funny that always comes up. I ask about skin clearly, like to be like, what's going on, and really tell me, or even like, are there mild breakouts, like kind of, because we can get so much information from skin, in particular to its relation to the gut, but also to that like kind of cortisol, inflammatory cascades, all of those pieces. So such an important thing. It's also funny, people forget to tell me that like don't have gallbladders too. I'm like, that's an organ that we're missing. Yeah, literally.
Like,
they're like,
gone,
by the way, I don't think I told you. And I'm like, we're at session 3. Come on.
Yeah, this is important information. Yeah. Oh my gosh, I know, it's crazy. And I think a big part of why Abby and I are doing this is because we want to highlight the opportunity here for you, and we don't want to participate in the normalization of these chronic symptoms that are disrupting your life. And that's just a big piece of our mission. It like gives me goosebumps because it just, feels really special to be able to have these conversations, here, and hopefully raise awareness and show people the opportunity in terms of healing.
And I think to that point too, like someone who's listening, who's like, F this. I've been doing the fundamentals for like, X amount of time, and, maybe like 6 months, 3 months, 6 months, like in that time frame that it's like, it can take a while to see the skin shift. Like, let's give it a good 6 months. And they're like, and I haven't seen any shifts. The fundamentals are even still important at that. Then it's like, okay, now maybe some of the deeper testing of, looking at the gut, looking at the hormones, looking at cortisol, like those are still, though, going to be built on the big rocks, which I love the way you say that, of those fundamentals. So it's not like, screw this, I'm going to throw these out and like, F that. It's like, okay, I got to go a little deeper now. But I've like, now, thank goodness, I've got this foundation so that when I go deeper, we're actually going to be able to get to the finish line. And we're not going to have to, trudge through this foundation, which can be some of the more challenging. Like, isn't it easy in a way to just like take a medication or a supplement or a whatever and kind of like, cross our fingers and hope that it just like poof goes away. So those foundations are so important. So I definitely know there could be, I certainly get that in clients in the gut health world that they're like, I'm the healthiest eater that, anybody knows. And usually it's like they're having like a ton of like salads and roughage, and there's like a lot of wonky meal timing. And it's, sometimes we have different definitions of what that means, but those fundamentals are, they're going to be a part of taking you to the finish line, even if you've been, doing that work and maybe not getting the results that you're hoping for.
100%. And I think it also speaks to the fact that there's a lot of confusing information out there about what is healthy. And it doesn't mean that you're not doing healthy things for yourself, but are you overlooking a very important piece that's creating a hole in the foundation? And ultimately, at the end of the day, in terms of something like, not working out fasted and prioritizing that well-rounded protein-rich breakfast, we are prioritizing safety in the body. We are reducing stress on the body, which at the end of the day, that is what it all boils down to. So look for those holes to determine if there are things that are amplifying stress for you. And start filling in the holes and give it a little bit of time.
Awesome. Well, this was a jam-packed Q&A session. I know that we will be doing another round of this in our season 2, which is going to be coming up. We're so excited to even be starting to talk about that. We're not there yet, though. We got a couple more episodes for you guys. So we hope that this is so helpful for you. We want to hear from you. What do you want to hear from us? Maybe there were some topics that were brought up in these Q&A sessions that you're like, wow, I need a way deeper dive on that, because that is totally a topic that we're interested in getting more information and application around. Like, we are in the brainstorming phases of our season 2. So this is really the time. I mean, it's always the time. We're so open to hear from you all, but this is really a great opportunity to help us to build what it is that our community is looking for. So we're super excited. The best way to connect with us is over Instagram at Your Body Has Your Back. We love that community. We love to build and nourish that community. So definitely visit us there and share with us what you're hoping to get more support around and how we can help you.
We can't wait to hear from you, and we will see you in the next episode.